As LL Cool J once said, "Don't call it a comeback, I've been here for years." This is the exact sentiment held by many a game on this list. Games that took time to bake, games that were delayed, moved into the new generation, a new studio, or just a new direction. To be honest, it doesn't take much to get a bad rep in the video game industry, and rightfully so, as many developers can seemingly be stuck in their ways. As a result, when announcing a new title, perhaps even a reboot for a franchise, developers can be met with opposition from fans. This list, however, is dedicated to those comebacks that proved everyone wrong, put the Doomslayer back into his natural habitat, giving Lara Croft a more distinct narrative and personality, or outright changing the perspective and tone from your prior, poorly received titles. It's still important to remember that not every comeback story is a winner, and we've snuck in a few surprises that didn't impress us after such a long wait. I'm Kirsten from WhatCulture Gaming, and these are 10 comeback video games that proved everyone wrong. Number 10, Rayman Origins. Being demoted to a known brand slapped onto some random franchise about rabbits is not a nice death to die for a classic video game character. Rayman, originally known for his 2D fast-paced platforming, is a comeback on a smaller scale, but one that deserves its place on this list. It took 8 years for Rayman to regain his prior role as a leading man, and although Rayman Origins wasn't a huge financial success, it was an awesome return that sparked a sequel just around the corner. The games are simple. You run along the level, picking up speed and slapping the enemies out of your way. The visuals are vibrant, along with a great soundtrack and level design. The downside is that Origins was fairly short. The upside, however, is that Rayman Legends, the better known sequel, improved in almost every way. More levels, which means more of those unique backdrops, more characters to play as, and bundled into Legends for no extra costs was the entirety of Rayman Origins. His career wasn't launched into the A-list with the likes of Mario, Sonic and Mega Man, but Rayman proved he could offer a unique edge to the 2D platforming genre once more. Number 9, Deus Ex Human Revolution. Many agreed that Deus Ex Invisible War, released in 2003, was a poor attempt at capitalising on a sequel to the masterpiece that was the original Deus Ex. Roughly 3 years later, it struggled to wrestle with the Xbox's hardware, while also being bland, blunt and repetitive in its approach. Deus Ex took a break after that, and 8 years later, we were introduced to Adam Jensen. Heavily augmented, grumpy, and bearing a big old chip on his shoulder, the player took control of Adam and all his wonderful abilities to get to the bottom of a mystery. Some felt that Deus Ex's reboot Human Revolution leaned far too much into the dark and moody stereotype of the cyberpunk genre. As well as moodiness, others felt that Human Revolution was just okay. However, it took the immersive sim and stretched it as far as it would allow, most specifically in regard to combat. Sneaking, hacking, smooth talking and brute forcing could all play a part, not just individually but in combination. Personally, I feel it's easy to look past Human Revolution, particularly nowadays when immersive sim elements have become so common. Human Revolution showed that the genre didn't need 100 abilities, or with branching trees, to get you invested in the possibilities within the game's levels. Number 8, Max Payne 3. A change in development, numerous delays, and the question of, why do we need a new Max Payne? The franchise had ended on a good standing with fans and holds a special place in many gamers' hearts because of its tone and simplistic gameplay. 9 years later, moved from Remedy Entertainment to Rockstar Studios amid 3 years worth of delays, Max Payne 3 genuinely hit out of the park with only few criticisms. Legitimately stunning in its graphics, gunplay comparable to no other, an enjoyable yet different writing style for Max, and most noticeably, a change in tone. This was a Max Payne, 10 years out, who hadn't really changed much in regards to his physique, even if the world around him had. The game was undeniably short, with theories arguing that it was more of a tech demo or experimental development towards Grand Theft Auto 5, though this had no impact on the finely tuned masterpiece that Max Payne 3 was. Some might say that constant action isn't always effective, but when it's intertwined with satisfying gameplay, movement and bullet time of Max Payne, it goes by within the blink of an eye. Number 7, Doom 2016. The title preceding Doom 2016, Doom 3, released in 2004, was all over the place. It didn't know what it wanted to be, and the final product really showcased such a confusing creation. With ideas of wanting to modernise Doom floating around, bringing it into cityscapes and more military environments, the original premise of what Doom was about had been muddied. Doom was now an identity crisis. Was it action horror leaning into tense atmospheres and scary environments? Well, it took 11 years, but ID Software finally gave a definitive answer. Doom is about a badass ripping demons apart and beating them with their own limbs. Doom 3 had people worried that the franchise was truly dead and buried, but with the rebirth of the Doomslayer ripping through Mars, we had hope once more. No more skulking through dark corridors, no more worrying about ammo. In fact, put your fist through a demon's head and he'll literally explode into ammo, and that is the Doom way. Fast-paced, constant shooting, an abundance of munitions, and a means to kill to your heart's content. Number 6, Resident Evil 7. From Doom 3 to Doom 2016, we see a developer proving themselves, which is similar to the narrative found between the Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil 7. This time, however, the gap is nowhere near as big. There are 5 years between Resident Evil 7 and 6, with 3 years between 6 and 5. Why is this important? Because the 5th and 6th installments are the highest grossing in Resident Evil history, and most notably, the 2 least favourite in the series unless co-op. It's easy to understand why this series progressed into more action, explosion-y content too, as Resident Evil 4 offered less survival horror and more action horror, thus the evolution. History aside, Resident Evil 6 was a low point, and people were not hopeful for what could come from a 7th installment. That is, until it was released that Resident Evil 7 would be first person, with a strong horror survival focus. It acted as a shorter, focused, well-refined example of what Capcom made themselves famous for. An admirable turn away from the high-selling mediocrity to a more polished, stylised product. It's also fair to attribute Capcom's interest in revisiting survival horror through Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes due to the huge interest in Resident Evil 7. Number 5, Shenmue 3. Not every comeback is a success story, most importantly from the fan reception. Why is Shenmue 3 on this list? Because it really was a comeback, putting itself out there on Kickstarter, gaining $2 million in 6 hours and a total of $6 million overall. Shenmue needing to be funded via Kickstarter is weird. But what's weirder is that all of these promised Steam copies would later be nixed, being sneakily switched to Epic Store copies. A bad start for a comeback. Still hopeful, waiting 18 years, fans stayed true to a beloved franchise, only to find that the final product really wasn't that good. Unfortunately, after almost 2 decades, somehow not a single higher-up realised that this game was not suitable to be released in 2019. The voice acting was horrendous. Combat, which was somehow a high point of the prior titles, is now delayed and featured neutered animations, as well as the game's signature gameplay of waiting and talking to poorly translated NPCs being the main focal point. Shenmue gained $6 million backed by fans. It's safe to say that they were proven wrong in that it is not the masterpiece they had been waiting for. Number 4, Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy. If it isn't broken, don't fix it, is the idea behind the remaster of the Crash Bandicoot trilogy. If only Shenmue had such an easy task. Crash is one of those beloved franchises, with most seeing him as the mascot of the PlayStation. However, after his original trilogy and being moved from Naughty Dog to other studios, he had a downward spiral. This spiral ended in 2010 with a 7-year hiatus. Weird title after weird title, each trying its best to capitalise on the namesake of Crash Bandicoot. Apparently, all he needed was to return to his roots, quite literally. Vicarious Visions took Naughty Dog's original creation and spruced it up, but not too much. As with any remaster, graphics got the biggest bump. Beyond that, you've now got all 3 games in one package. One thing Visions made sure not to tamper with was Crash Bandicoot's difficulty. They were adamant about not making it easier or remove any of those pixel-perfect moments. Instead, you've got Crash as you remember him, washing the last decade of bad taste out of your mouth and hopefully lighting the way for Vicarious Visions to get their own go at the series. Number 3, Kingdom Hearts 3. Crash Bandicoot had an easy job in comparison to what Kingdom Hearts 3 had to try and do. Around 14 years between Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3, with remixes and spin-offs in between, it had to balance out the weight of all these past titles with a huge cast of characters and franchises, while also being mixed with Disney, as well as the long time between releases. It was seemingly in development forever, and that is not a good thing in regard to fan anticipation. Our second and final negative entry in this list, which proved everyone wrong in the way you really don't want. A convoluted mess with tons of over-expositional dialogue and cutscenes, then more cutscenes and played out animations. There is a game in there somewhere, stretched thinly between different gameplay elements and styles, trying to juggle the many balls Kingdom Hearts has thrown into the air. Fans agreed that the game lacked substance. The framework for what could have been was there, including an epic story and huge stakes. Looking at the game as a whole though, it did not live up to the expectations that had been raised over the years. Number 2, Tomb Raider 2013. From core design to crystal dynamics, ending currently on Eidos Montreal, Tomb Raider has changed hands numerous times throughout its 25-year tenure. Starting on the PlayStation, becoming cross-platform and slowly losing its selling power, something had to change, which interestingly enough wasn't the switch to Crystal Dynamics. Crystal had control over Tomb Raider since 2006, starting with Tomb Raider Legend, slowly releasing titles that were received as generally mediocre. That was until 2013. As with all reboots, you obviously had to get dark, gritty and moody, just ask Adam Jensen. Tomb Raider 2013 was the breath of fresh air that the series needed, and although not loved by everyone, paved the way for the incredible sequels. Lara, now in a more vulnerable state, just starting out her journey, was imbued with personality and ambition, as well as a variety of environments for her to be exploring. Overall, the game does so much more right than the few grey areas, such as poorly implemented survival crafting elements. A narrative that puts Lara Croft on a beginning journey involving naivety, her first kill, and some of the most beautiful environments in gaming, of which Shadow of the Tomb Raider is still being used to benchmark modern setups. Number 1, God of War. Boy, how a great tone can really put a series back on course. It's hard to emphasise just how much of a difference it can make if you, the developer, take a hard, serious look at what you want your title to be and then you actually do it. This isn't to say the God of War games were lacking, they were enjoyed alongside other inclusives such as Uncharted and Infamous. Prior titles were never bad, at best they were drifting from PlayStation players' focus. The big thing to change here was the tone, taking a more serious look at an aged Kratos and his son. The Norse era of God of War was at risk of being more of the same. It could quite easily have decided that bigger was better and Kratos just needed to fight more. Instead, it shifted focus, refining gameplay to offer a smoother experience that was pushed forward by a beautiful narrative and a new, fresh relationship in the series. The guardian/child dynamic isn't new by any means, but it does act as a realistic anchor which God of War managed incredibly among other more fantastical elements. And that's our list. Did any of these games prove you wrong? Leave us a comment below and let us know. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. But for now, I've been Kirsten from WhatCulture Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.